Hello, friends, family, disciples, beloved. Uh, it's your boy, David Buffington here. I want to do a book review today. For those of you that know me, you know that I love reading books. Um, I loved reading books when I was younger, in prison. My love of reading just took off. That habit has stayed with me to where I try to read a book a week, sometimes longer than that. But I love reading books and I love studying popular men of God, influential men of God from different tribes, different theological points of view. Like I'll read um, commentary from John Wesley. Uh, I'll read Josephus, Kenneth Copeland. And today we're going over this kind of a classic book for the Word of Faith movement, The Laws of Prosperity by um, and I had heard parts of audio of him on this, but I had never fully read it. And it's one of those things where you might have an idea of the rules, but reading it just kind of ingrains it more in your heart, in your spirit. There's only 4 chapters to this book, which is nice. It's short, it's sweet. The chapters are Laws of Prosperity, the Established Covenant, and the Established Heart, your heavenly account, and walking in prosperity. And overall, the book was good. A lot of the teachings are pretty much identical to Kenneth Hagin. Kenneth Hagin about prosperity. Even he has a prayer in here to on how to pray for finances and how to call them in from your heavenly account. And it's almost verbatim Hagin's teachings and prayer and using faith to activate the promises of God. He adds a couple steps, like Kenneth Hagin's 4-step one. He gives a 6 or 7-step prayer for it, but it's basically the same, kind of thing. And yeah, overall it was good. So you can tell that he was a disciple of Kenneth Hagin, heavily affected by Kenneth Hagin. Kenneth Hagin was a little bit earlier. Kenneth Hagin was a little bit when he was alive, and Kenneth Copeland was kind of like, if Kenneth Hagin had kept pastoring, Kenneth Copeland, had that pastoring thing where Kenneth Hagin later in life, he did not pastor. He went around traveling. He had Rhema Bible School. And the greatest thing about this book is really fundamental. It's talking about prosperity, but it's faith in the Word of God. That's his main premise, is having faith in the Word. And that is so good. I really felt like I got an impartation of faith. There are things like, yeah, I should believe the Word, have it in my heart. Reading this really amped up my faith. It really amped up my excitement for the Word of God. He continuously home of getting the Word in your heart, believing it, being established in it. And when you have that faith in it, it leads to action. Another good thing is he talked about your journey of faith and how earlier when he first started getting taught about prosperity from God, that he would give a little bit. Like he partnered with Oral Roberts ministry and he gave $10 a month, and he would believe God for 20 back, and every month he'd get $20 from someplace outside of his income. And he talks about how this big mega faith and these big mega seeds, it doesn't start out like that. Like in seeds, I mean giving big offerings or big investments. It doesn't start out like that. It starts when your faith grows, and whatever measure you're at, use it and it'll grow. He also talked about being specific for your faith, and how early on he made mistakes of, like, say he wanted a car or needed he believed God for the amount of what the car like how much money he needs for the car. But he said he should not have been doing that. He should have been just asking God and believing for the car. That if God for the car, and if God wanted to give him through somebody, and if God wanted to, there's so many other ways he can get what he wanted, but he didn't really want the money for the car. So he talked about kind of narrowing in and focusing your faith, being very specific about what you're believing for, because the more specific it is, the less general, really, the more faith that requires. And he doesn't say that in here, but I'm saying it. The more particular you are about what you're believing for from God, the more visioning happens, or picturing it with your imagination, which is a big part of the spiritual realm, and it's a big part of faith, is visioning, meditating on an image based on the Word of God. Yeah, so very, very powerful. So he talked about that. He talked about giving to the poor, like just being generous, and how that's lending to God. So if I lend $10 to a poor person, I can just count on it that God's going to repay me, and repay me even more, because God's a man of his word. He's a God of character. We talked about tithing, and how tithing is the only thing where you can do it with a measure of doubt, like, because it's the only thing where God says, test me in this, try me in this, like, see if this works. Whereas most things of faith, it's you have to believe it works before you start it. But tithing is something that's kind of unique, because I cannot be about tithing, but decide to test him with tithing. And God says that he'll come through, of course, from Malachi 3. Your heavenly account, concept of, you have money in heaven where moth and rust cannot get to it. This thing where Paul was talking about getting an offering and adding it to the heavenly account or whatever, which, he's basically saying the more that you give and are generous and are obedient also to when you're being led to give, that stores up and need it, and then you can withdraw the deposit for it, which is okay, but is from a works mindset, and that's dangerous long term, and it's just not true long term, because I don't receive from God because of how much I give. I receive from God because of how much Jesus gave. You understand? I'm not blessed because I tithe because I'm blessed. The new covenant is different from the old covenant, because the old covenant is do, become, receive, whereas that's the old covenant. The new covenant is receive, become, do. So it's completely different. I am blessed before I realize I'm blessed, and when I realize I'm blessed, I start to do. It's completely upside down from the old covenant, because the old covenant is man trying to gain righteousness, gain things from God. The new covenant is glorifying God, praising God, worshiping God, everything that he's done. So the new covenant is about receiving, where the old covenant is about producing or working. And you see some of that mindset here, and he's using texts that are saying things like that. There are Bible verses that say things like, the more you give, the more you'll be able to receive from God. Even Jesus saying, to he who gives, it'll be given, not shaking or running over, all that stuff. But you really, 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 really got to study the context of who's teaching, who they're teaching to, and why they're teaching. Because there are a lot of places where, yes, it's the Word of God, but it's not necessarily new covenant mindset. Like the old covenant is all trying to reveal sin, whereas the new covenant is trying to reveal Christ. You see? And yeah, Jesus said stuff, and Jesus is the author of the new covenant, but a lot of his teachings are old covenant. A lot of his teachings are exposing sin and hypocrisy and condemning certain types of sin. But then there's other places where he is teaching new covenant and the kingdom and stuff like that. So you really got to see what's going on and analyze it, and to be able to come to that, um, to be able to discern that, like, you're like, who are you to say this? If it's New Testament, it must be New Covenant. You can't say that parts of the New Testament aren't New Covenant. And in order to get to a real biblical place to start to discern that, I think the Romans is the best possible place. Like, study Romans, because it's like the the constitution of the new covenant. Like, it's the best place that fully explains the old covenant, transition from old to new, and what the new covenant is. And then books like Galatians, and those are really the best. Maybe First John. So yeah. So and that's really all that I got from the book. It's very short, but what I did get was a lot of impartation of faith for finances. Like, literally, I could feel my faith growing as I read it. Even parts where I didn't agree, or I realized there was some old wine or some misapplication, it was still really good. And really, the book is about, like, he has this part where he goes into the parable of the seeds and protecting the word of God in your heart, and the word of God bearing fruit, and mixing the seed of the word with faith. So good. He is just a master of faith, a true student that became a master of the revelation Kenneth Hagin had on faith. And it was a really good book. I suggest it to you. It is really, 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 really good, and a great place to start understanding, the prosperity and the access and the riches we have because of what Jesus has done in the new covenant. So yeah. So if you enjoyed this, please like the comment, please subscribe, and hit the notification button for support. More stuff coming up. I'm gonna try to post every weekday and see how that goes. And I want to hear from you. What do you think about the laws of prosperity and the prosperity gospel? What do you think of this book if you read it? I want to know, are there any books that you want me to read and do a review on? Any books at all. So, because I'd love to read, and I especially love to read from different camps and different theologians and different teachers. I love to study teachers. So if you got something interesting that you want me to do a book review on, let me know. And my main niche for books is, of course, Christianity, but I love to read spiritual books, and I love self-help books, leadership books, psychology books too. I love, that's my jam. Outside of that, I'm not really into it that much. But when I read them and I do reviews, it'll be from a perspective. So if you got anything like that, let me know. All right. I love y'all. Please keep me in prayer. If you got any prayer requests, let me know. All right. Kingdom